Good morning, everybody. I am Sergei Antonov, Assistant Professor of History at Yale University, and I welcome all of you here on behalf of Yale's Russian, East European, and Eurasian Studies program, or also known as REEES. And so today's program is on the current events in Ukraine that I hope most of you have been following on this current crisis that is looking like it's still very much ongoing and developing. We were just talking now a few minutes ago, we were hoping it's going to be kind of more of a historical exercise, but it's actually pretty alarming. And thankfully, we have a wonderful set of experts here that I'm going to introduce them, and then each of them will have about 10 minutes or so to sort of make their presentation, and then we're going to open the sort of the field for questions. So so let me introduce everybody. So first, our first speaker is going to be Angelina Kariakina, who is a journalist from Kiev, Ukraine. She has a very extensive experience with independent media, has a lot of publications, and she's a co-founder of the Public Interest Journalism Lab in Ukraine. Then our second speaker is Paweł who is a journalist from Poland, and he was a Poynter Fellow at Yale University. It's a very prestigious journalism fellowship back in 2015, and he has reported extensively on refugee crisis, on wars in Ukraine, Iraq, and Syria. And he also has a lot of stories, a lot of images, and various international and national media. Then our third panelist is Dr. Timothy Frye, who is a Marshall D. Shulman Professor of Post-Soviet Foreign Policy at Columbia University. He's author of numerous publications, including 4 books, 2 of which won major awards. And his most recent book is titled Weak Strongmen, The Limits of Power in Putin's Russia. So he is a very highly recognized expert on the contemporary Russian politics. And then last but not least is the organizer of this panel, Yevhenii Monastyrskyi, who is an MA candidate in European and Russian Studies here at Yale. And he's a European Studies graduate fellow at the MacMillan Center. He is a native of Luhansk, Ukraine, and has a very extensive experience, political organizing, activism experience in the region. So it's a wonderful panel, and without any further delay, I'm going to open the floor. I think we would go in the order in which I presented the speakers, right? I think that was the understanding. And so we're going to start with Angelina. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Sergei, and thanks everyone for having this voice from Kiev, actually. What the world media is asking us, Ukrainian journalists and just people in Ukraine, is how do you feel about the possible threat, and how do you guys get prepared for this possible threat, for this possible invasion? On one hand, we've been living in these circumstances for the past 8 years, so it's no news for us that the threat is here. The question is, how imminent is it today? And I have to say, probably Ukrainians are more calm than anyone would expect them to be. From what we see, from what the media, foreign media are doing and asking is, do you have your go bags or grab bags? Do you have a plan to go west? Do you do something else to evacuate your family and things like that? Well, some of us do. Some of us do have some grab bags. Some of us do have a plan to evacuate families, but the majority of Ukrainians, many of them having no other place to go, are just keep on doing the things that they normally do. So the streets are full with people, the shops are full with goods and products. There are no lines in the drugstores, no lines at the oil stations. And one of the most sensitive signs for us Ukrainians is the currency exchange rate, which is more or less stable and didn't break, as we call it, the psychological threshold, which keeps us more or less calm each day. At the same time, some of Ukrainians are asking, and mostly opposition leaders are asking, whether President Zelensky is downplaying this threat, whether, well, the West couldn't be so wrong about the 16th of February, you know, about the imminence of the threat and things like that. What we understand, of course, and what the government has explained us, on-rec, off-rec, different government officials and presidential office officials, explaining us that the goal of the government, of course, is to keep everyone calm and to keep the economy going. As soon as there's a sign from the government that people need to do something critical, like leave their cities, evacuate westwards or anything else, we do realize that this will be the start of the economic collapse. People will go, you know, rush to the stores, rush to the oil gas stations, and the picture will be exactly the picture you would expect to have with the imminent threat at your door. So far, it is not like that. People are still doing their stuff. Kids are going to school. Can you hear me well? Because my internet is unstable. Okay, great. So the kids are going to schools and kindergartens, and probably COVID, the Omicron is for many parents much more a threat as the possible Russian invasion. But I have to say that many of us are quite confused by the fact that the whole world is discussing our destiny and what can we do in this situation. Everyone is talking about our destiny, but what is it actually up to us? I recently talked to my friend, and I think I gave this dialogue in one of the articles that I did recently. I asked her if she is, you know, going to have a grab bag or to evacuate her family elsewhere. And she asked me, what do you think we can do in this situation? A crazy scenario like bombing Kiev or invading capital seems like an apocalypse. So how can you possibly be prepared for an apocalypse? There is no way for yourself to get prepared for an apocalypse. So the only thing that we can do is just to stay sane. But we still wonder, I mean, we as a civil society, probably journalists, apart from the fact that probably there's a minimum that we can do in terms of defense, civilian defense, what can we do if the threat just stays where it is for the coming future? Whether if the threat is still there, like it's been there for 8 years, and everyone will be telling us, well, that Russia might invade for the coming, I don't know, 5, 4, another 8 years. What is it actually up to us to do? And I believe that there's a number of things that, apart from apparent things like getting prepared military, getting prepared all the possible, you know, civilian defense systems ready, is to look into our civil society and try to understand what is wrong with it for the past 8 years of war. Living inside the society which is at war is quite a challenge for a democracy. And there are many things that we need to fix, or we need to keep in mind and consider for future. I frankly believe that social cohesion and civil participation should be treated by us and by the government and by the civil society as much, you know, as serious as improving the army. What we see is that people in Ukraine, as probably in many other young democracies, feel less sense of agency that they could have in this situation. The lack of trust towards many institutions, including media, including government, including healthcare system, because if we look at the level of vaccination in Ukraine, it's just dramatically low even now with high availability of all the possible vaccines in shopping centers and in all the hospitals. we need to think how we improve this trust and how we improve the trust inside the society towards each other, region to region, community to community, institution to institution. And there are actually many things that we can do in improving that. But an open dialogue and engaging people around us, explaining how interdependent we are, again, region to region, community to community, country to country, actually, is something that might help us improve this social cohesion that we dramatically need, especially at this moment. Just some fresh facts that I wanted also to share with you at the end of my intervention is the recent polls that we got actually this morning from a polling station rating. So the number of Ukrainians who believe that the threat of invasion is imminent went down from 28% to 19%. But at the same time, the number of those who are confident that Ukraine will be, that Ukraine is ready to resist, went up from 58 to 64%. This is a very interesting number, I think, for all of us to think, especially here in Ukraine, and to work with these numbers. But it also gets me thinking about another question that I frequently get from my foreign friends and foreign media, whether we get tired of this whole war story, of this whole threat that is there at our door. I think at this moment, Ukrainians are more mobilized than tired, even though 8 years of war, of course, they do not go just like that. Many things work as an erosion to democracy and civil society and even freedom of speech, but that's another topic for us to discuss. But at the same time, the current state, not only in my bubble, but just even if we look at these polls, gives us a feeling of a huge mobilization in Ukraine. And actually also, if we look to another poll, around every third of 1 in 3 Ukrainian is ready to go and defend his or her country in the case of invasion. Probably I'll stop here and I'll gladly participate in the discussion and answer the questions.
Thank you very much, Angelina, for this talk. And I think we should just go ahead and move to Paweł next. Paweł?
Yes, hello. Thank you for invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. I would start from the anecdote. So quite recently, when I was called by one of the editors from the media I never worked with, and they asked me, would you come to Ukraine to cover stories for us? At the beginning, I was quite surprised what is happening, and I didn't understand, because media in Poland are not the same like in the US, so they are not sending correspondents too often. And I couldn't really get what changed and what's the reason why they want to send me here. Because if I say 3 months ago, hey guys, can I go to Kyiv and to talk with the people here? They would say, what are you talking about? That's the least interesting story. And at the moment, everyone is talking, with everyone about everything, and every story seems tempting. And you can see how media are recycling the stories. And in some extent, it's a bit similar case. When I was in 2018 in Syria, in city of Manbij, which was held by Kurdish forces backed by US. However, city was claimed by the Turkey. And Turkey was actually threatening that they want to attack, they will overtake the city, whatever it costs. However, I was at the front lines there, and they were quiet. Fighters were bored, they were doing nothing. So basically, they were like, once they're hunting for the rabbits, other day they were shooting the balloon because they were worried that can be a drone, but literally nothing was happening at the front line. However, in the city itself, you can feel like really huge tension. I talk with the people, I asked them what's going on, how they feel. And they said, we don't see anything on the ground, but when we watch TV, we see that our city is in danger, that something can happen. And with some extent, some similarity you can find in Ukraine at the moment. So it's not the conflict where you can maybe accept yesterday when there were more tensions in Donbass, but still I will talk about it a bit later. When you don't see the crisis on the ground. So I went to Kyiv, I went to Kharkiv, which is close to the Russian border. I went directly to the Russian border, and you don't see, like, of course, you see people who are aware, who some afraid, some want to fight back, they want to, I don't know, join territorial defense. However, it's not what you can find like often in the like a general media coverage. So it's not like people are, what Angelina said, that they are afraid, they are just panicking, or they like, you know, going to the shops and buying everything. You go to the supermarket and the shelves are full, basically. So so yeah, people basically are aware of the conflict, but the things are happening in the offices. So there is a threat of the war, like a new war, or the escalation of this war, but it's not happening in the front lines. So it's really like, you know, interesting if you go to Donbass, for example, and the number of the journalists currently is, I guess, I don't have exact numbers, it's bigger than it was in 2014 when the really war broke out. And like, you know, it was really a lot of happening. Right now, there is nothing there wasn't nothing happening, and there was like a media everywhere. There were lines for to go to the front line, basically. Press officers were not able to just handle all media groups which were coming. And so that's another thing which was really weird, what I couldn't understand what happened, because like a year ago as well was like the Russian troops en masse next to the border, and there was up to 170,000 Russian troops. Up to only today, they said there is like, I think 180, 190. But till like a few days ago, everyone was talking about the 150, 130, 120,000 soldiers. So there was even less soldiers than last year. And last year, people were saying, ex-military experts, they were saying that it's not enough troops to do any serious military action. So, and Russian troops are gathering all the time near Ukrainian border since last 5 years, 6 years, sorry. And there wasn't so much panic around that. People were talking, of course, about that, but it wasn't the case. Even if you look at Donbass, again, nothing was happening there. Like, it was calm. There was 1 violation per day, 2 violations per day, 3 violations per day. But usually there was quiet. There were like even if you look at yesterday, when you have like a 60 violations, if I'm not mistaken, it's really low comparing to years 2014, 15, 16. I remember when I was trying to talk with the editors, talk with the media, and telling, hey, people, there is like, you know, fighting going still in Ukraine, and they were saying, well, it's not interesting anymore. So I understand that something what happened again, there was quiet for months, but still, we shouldn't think about this conflict like, you know, that it's really like heating up. There is an imminent danger and something will happen, because this escalation is still really limited. So the fighting in Donbass, even 60 violations, it's not the thing which can change actually situations on the front line. It can be like a recapture. Of course, again, there is a threat and people understand that, but it's not the thing which should be like brought up on such a level, on such a scale. And yeah, I mean, what I'm seeing mostly in my work, like when I was talking here with the people, it's a bit what Angelina said. Like, yeah, people, like, you can find 3, I would say, groups of people maybe. So some people are really panicking. You can find them, especially they are telling that it's related to, that's actually interesting part, what I was trying to a bit explore. It's related to COVID, because, you know, so many people are working in homes. They're meeting less people. There is less interaction, so they don't have this feeling of unity. Like, for example, 8 years ago, when they were like going like to Maidan, for example, and they were gathering and they're seeing that not alone in all this crisis. And currently, they are feeling much more isolated from that. So that's causing panic for them. There are people who are a bit ignoring this threat, and they're saying nothing is happening. There is no know another reason to renewing the war or the escalation of the war. Because if you, I don't know, you go to the border, there is there is nothing prepared. It doesn't look that the situation can escalate. And there are people who are just aware, people who just used somehow opportunity here to prepare themselves, because that's a thing. And the quite a lot of people again are saying that we missed opportunity. There was 8 years of the conflict going on. Situation is pretty serious. There was a threat of the escalations, and a lot of people didn't prepare. So right now there is like a new wave of people who just want to do something. So or they want to join territorial defense, which is happening. There is like, I think, around 20,000 people at the moment. Again, Angelina, maybe you know the exact numbers, but I think that was the last, something like that was recently the number. And it's growing super fast, because it was like 1-2 months ago, it was around less than 1,000 people basically, and it's a newly formed unit. Some of the people are just joining trainings to how to survive in the city in the case of emergency. So some people are preparing these evacuation backpacks, so go like backpacks too with the necessary things. They're preparing documents, they are going to the first aid training, but it's rather opportunity. They were remember again that something is happening, and they, especially younger generation, which were like 18, 17, 20 years when the conflict broke out, because they understand right now that that unfortunately they are not safe. And even if the war, which was a bit, the conflict which was a bit frozen in the sense of the territories, it wasn't a threat that it will expand. Right now, they saw a perspective that this conflict can expand again, and the cities can be in danger. So it's not like that people are panicking, but it's not like that people are just downplaying the threats. They are trying to think. They're trying to make a plan. They're trying to be calm and try to understand how to survive in the circumstances, in the sense how to live with that, how to become calm. How to, basically that's the thing. So and I think that's another thing that people start to realize. I'm talking more about the younger people, that this threat is not disappearing, and probably not disappear for next year. So I talk with some people who are actually considering to move out from Ukraine for a time, to move for the longer time. But in general, it's like a way to adapt to this, like a new form of the threat, or maybe not so new, but like a new old, I would say, kind of conflict. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Paweł. Another very informative talk. And let's move on to our next speaker, Professor Frye.
Thank you very much for the invitation. And I don't have such a good vantage point of events on the ground from the Upper West Side of Manhattan as my my two other co-panelists. I was asked to talk about the conflict with an emphasis on the Russian point of view. And I want to present a couple different ways that people talk about what's driving Russian foreign policy in this crisis. And some people focus on Putin's background and personality, and Putin is doing what he's doing in Ukraine because that's the kind of person that he is. And this approach, I think, is problematic in that Putin's not telling me what his sincere preferences are about what his goals are. And if we rely on his public statements, like the public statements of any politician, we have to take them with a grain of salt, because they're really trying to shape the narrative rather than to reveal what they really want. So I think we need to understand who Putin is, but I think putting Putin on the couch and trying to psychoanalyze him and use this as an explanation for why Russia has taken such a much more assertive stance towards Ukraine now is problematic in part because it doesn't explain why Russian policy has changed so much throughout the course of his tenure in office. Other people have looked at the crisis and tried to draw lessons from Russian and Soviet history. And again, there's it's a very useful tool. But again, here we need to be careful, in part because Russian and Soviet history is very rich, and historians disagree about what has driven Russian and Soviet foreign policy, and whether it's primarily reacting to moves by stronger countries to the west of it and to the east of it, or is it driven internally by factors that are unique to Russia's geography and other factors. Also, if we look at this crisis, more recent historical analogies, I think, also aren't very helpful. You know, much reference has been made to the Russian-Georgian War, the annexation of Crimea in 2014, and the conflict in eastern Ukraine in 2014 and 2015, and the intervention in Syria. But these all seem, you know, different in many dimensions from what we're seeing taking place now, in part because I think in those cases, we have clear events that are sparking behavior on the Russian side and on the Georgian side, or on the Ukrainian side, or on the Syrian side. In this crisis does not seem to be driven by any kind of specific large-scale event, like a border skirmish in the Georgian case, the fall of the Yanukovych government in 2014, or, you know, events on the ground in Syria. It seems much more to be a choice made by the Russian government to escalate at this particular moment, rather than a decision that's really driven by a particular event. So another way to think about what's driving Russian foreign policy is to think about Putin as an autocrat in an autocratic system. And autocrats have at least two things to worry about. One is popular opinion and doing enough to keep the public satisfied so they don't go on the street and protest and risk political instability and the potential turnover in the government. And Russian public opinion towards this particular conflict is really interesting, and it reflects longer-term trends in Russian public opinion towards Russia's global position and Russia's foreign policy. And in general, even going back to 2015, 2014, if you look at Russian public opinion, it's very sensitive to the potential loss of casualties. So Russia has been supportive of efforts to provide humanitarian assistance to the Donbass and Luhansk. But even when the fighting was hot in 2014, only about a quarter of Russians supported the introduction of Russian troops into eastern Ukraine. If we look at the intervention in Syria, this has not been a particularly popular endeavor. And more recent polls show only about a third of Russians support this particular effort. If you ask Russians over the long span of the last 15 years, every few years, the Levada Center asks a question that says, would you rather see Russia as a great power that countries fear, but not the most economically advanced country, or an economically advanced country, but perhaps not one that other countries fear? So really forcing them to make this trade-off between economic development and global power status, the classic kind of guns versus butter trade-off. Overwhelmingly, the Russians choose economic development over great power status. And I think the Russian government understands this. This is one of the reasons why Russian support for forces in eastern Ukraine has been denied for so long, why it's been dangerous for Russian journalists to report on this particular issue. Also, if we look at Russian warfighting tactics in Syria, they've really been designed to minimize casualties and rely more on air power than perhaps more rewarding strategy, but also ones that might involve more risk. At the same time, so the Russian public opinion is, Russian public opinion also overwhelmingly recognizes Ukraine as a sovereign state, and only less than 20% of Russians think that Russia and Ukraine should be united into a single country. So Russian foreign policy in this particular instance doesn't seem to be driven by some Russian cultural urge for great power status, or kind of push from below. At the same time, 50% of Russians blame NATO for the current crisis. About 15% blame Ukraine for the crisis, and very few Russians blame Russia for this particular crisis. And of course, the Kremlin has control of state media and has many tools in order to shape public opinion. So I think how Russian public opinion responds to the crisis will depend a lot on the facts on the ground, whether the pretext that's used for an expansion of military activity is seen as credible by the Russian public, and whether or not there is loss of life. And also, Putin is an autocrat. Russia is not a democracy. And even in democracies, public opinion doesn't always translate into policy. So Putin can override public opinion and use military force and risk Russian lives. But I think the point is that he would lose some political capital and put at risk what he often touts as his main achievement, which is bringing some measure of stability to Russia. The other group that Putin has to be concerned about are insiders, his inner circle of powerful business people and state officials. And this group tends to take a much more hawkish, a much more anti-American line. And they seem to view Russia or Ukraine not just as a security threat, which could be addressed by arms control agreements, confidence building measures, in other kind of standard security tools, but that this group goes so far out of its way to try to deny the legitimacy of the Ukrainian government and the Zelensky government, and to at times not even recognize Ukraine as a state, suggests that even beyond the security issues, Russia would certainly be interested in having influence over domestic political arrangements in Ukraine. So Putin has to balance these two competing forces. And, I don't know which one will win out. Mr. Putin doesn't share his thoughts in advance with me. But of course, a good bluff has to look exactly like the real thing if it's going to work. So, looking at troop movements on the ground is often, helpful in figuring out what Russia is capable of doing. But whether they will actually do it, of course, is very difficult to judge. But I would say one thing, that there's been so much talk about how costly a military escalation in Ukraine would be for Russia. Massive sanctions, international isolation, potential loss of life, potential instability. There's been very little discussion, I think, unfortunately, about what the benefits to the Kremlin might be of a crushing defeat of the Ukrainian army that would be an embarrassment for the Biden administration, that would really put great pressure on NATO, which has put a lot of political capital on trying to prevent war in Ukraine. And also, the voice of Moscow, I think, would have greater weight if it actually uses its military power and delivers a real crushing blow, and then sues for a punitive peace towards Ukraine, than if Russia is able to use its military power to achieve some kind of temporary settlement. So I'm hoping that doesn't happen. This would be a disaster for Ukraine. It would be a disaster for Europe. I think it would also be a disaster for Russia. So I'm hoping that this doesn't happen, but I think in our public debate about the costs and benefits of particular policies that the Kremlin might take, I think we've spent a lot of time talking about the costs of military action. And we also need to recognize that for some groups within the Kremlin, there might be some perceived benefits of an expansion of Russian military activity in Ukraine. I hate to end on that sober note, you know, I do hope that all parties are able to find a peaceful resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Frye. I think this was also extremely helpful. So let's move on to our final presenter, Yevhenii, please. The floor is yours.
Yep, thank you, and thank you, Professor Frye, for finishing on this note, because this is actually what happens right now. Right now, the news was just broke like hour and a half ago. That's in Donetsk and Luhansk, those puppet governments are evacuating people and putting everybody at arms, and spreading the news that the war is imminent, but now on another front. Well, at least on the Donbass, which is bringing me to the point that I wanted to make, to the punchline actually I wanted to make in the whole 10 or so minutes given it. So I'll begin with my punchline as a historian who happened occasionally do social research because coming originally from Donbass on the implications of war, working mostly on the IDPs. I would say that with all problems, Ukraine has more experience and readiness to handle the humanitarian side of the crisis, which I believe, which also I see the reaction right now from the Russian government, which is saying they are not ready to take those people from occupied territories of Donbass to Rostov Oblast, which is could be a very peculiar situation. To give a little bit of the context for those who don't know, and I know for the presenters, this is wrong audience to preach, because like Ukraine have over 1.4 million people who are officially registered as internally displaced, while their integration into the host communities is generally regarded as successful. The serious issues persist in Ukraine, particularly in the areas of social protection, in the social economic rights, employment, access to services, you name it. And the relocation of a citizen in the neighboring regions in 2014 and 15 was hectic and unorganized, and country wasn't ready for 1.5 million. And what to say, basically, European Union wasn't ready for a couple millions in 2015. And we're talking about Ukraine in the worst economical situation since the independence in 2014 and 15. In any event, the last year's studies we conducted with organizations like People in Need, we see that even host communities close to the front line are managed to incorporate internally displaced person, and there are even such things as IDP councils appeared on the regional level, on the territorial community level. So here's my first punchline coming to the secret. Ukraine is more ready to handle the social crisis of the potential war. Doesn't mean it has resources to handle this properly, but the strategies and policies are there. Though again, how imperfect they are. The other side, which is a problem which Ukraine have for years already, and my Ukrainian advisor, Professor Mikhaeva, did the great research with the colleagues about the mental health issues of the internally displaced persons, and the government not addressing actually this issue, which is so showing the weak side of the situation. Basically, a study made by Professor Miheva and her colleagues have shown this about 20% of IDPs having moderate or severe anxiety, and and about less than a quarter of IDPs have a clinically significant anxiety symptoms, and they need clinical help. They don't get it. In this situation, Ukrainian authorities have little dialogues with IDPs and the other target groups, particularly veterans. Another interesting point for Ukrainian situation, we have the communication from the side of Ukraine comes to the great reserve of the veterans, of the combat veterans, which is actually asset of Ukrainian military, but it's actually in the same time growing problem. I and my colleagues are working for last half year or so on greater project of the incorporation of the veterans into host communities, because this is the issue which also I believe Russian government, from the analysis I see, doesn't ready to handle, as well as not ready to handle the flow of IDPs and refugees. Which is also bringing to the point of the relationship between Ukraine and EU in this situation, which Professor Frye mentioned, the cost and benefit for the US government, which is obvious, and benefit for Russia is not obvious. Of course, it's debated all over the place. At the same time, Europeans from at least few roundtables I attended earlier this week. The talk about potential flow of refugees from Ukraine is just absent. So this is another interesting point for me, as more as a historian in this situation, because it seems like 100 years in after the first waves of the refugees in Europe, nobody learned the lessons, and or at least they hoping for something else. Maybe this is the lure of the German government. For the final point from my side, the Angelina brought up some latest data coming from Ukrainian sociologists. There's also a recent all-Ukrainian survey from Democratic Initiative Foundation saying that about 65% of Ukrainians believe Russian Federation actually started war, which is also a more important popular opinion situation here. And the number of people who are ready to defend in different Ukraine in different ways rose in 2 months for 7.5% up to 57.5%. And we have and from those and about 33% are ready to take arms, which is also probably considered in Kremlin. I would suppose so. Here we come actually to the point where I wanted to discuss with like colleagues from journalistic side, and like for the whole presentation of the problem. It's double-edged problem. It's a problem of presupposition and attunement. Presupposition by the Western media and Ukrainian media about different scenarios. They talking about the same events in the different tones. Which making everybody pissed. It will be the light word to say, because and here's another side is attunement between those ideas of invasion, imminent, or whatever word you use. So because obvious thing that's Ukrainian society, as Paweł mentioned, is basically this proverbial frog in slowly boiling water. It's the slow cooking conflict is there for almost 8 years, and people are used to this. And even actually, latest polling shows this, like even there's a drop of population who want to relocate in case of whatever happens. There's a drop of population who want to relocate abroad or even to other region. So either it's very high level of bravery, or it's just numbness. And I will probably put my money on the latter. and which is also can be a leverage for Kremlin in taking actions. So basically, I would say that's well, as I was as I was mentioning all the time, we should look closely not to the northern or southern part, but to the Donbas all the time. We should look at the contact line communities and issues of the readiness to deal with the social repercussions, because Ukraine have more to say on this situation, while Russian and separatist side is basically constantly reproducing the story about fascist and nationalist government and people being eaten alive. Yeah, this is basically coming back to my earlier punchline. That's Ukraine have more experience in handling social conflict, but obviously doesn't have a gun power here.
Thank you very much, Yevhenii, and also thanks to all four of our panelists. I think this was extremely helpful, extremely informative. And now we're going to have some time for a Q&A. And so what we're going to do, I'm going to warm us up a little bit with just a couple of questions while you guys are thinking of yours. And these are just meant as again, just kind of jump in, give you a chance to sort of develop your ideas a little bit more. And as to sort of the rest of the attendees, so there's a Q&A function that I would encourage you to use. And in fact, one of the things I'm going to do is kind of rephrase one of the questions that's already been posed in the Q&A field. I mean, also feel free to enter your question in the chat function, but Q&A works quite well, so I would encourage you to use it. So my questions, they are, very general, and I'm a historian. Of course, Russia especially is a country with unpredictable past, so there are a lot of questions, but at least past is past, right? But those of us who are trying to analyze, ongoing, or at least understand, ongoing events, right? Figuring out how to engage with this kind of ongoing crisis. Not just those of us who are academics and kind of specialists in the region, but also people there on the ground, in Kiev, in Warsaw. So, like, what kind of lens the four of you would propose that we develop? Like, what kind of analytical tools? I mean, it's one of the hardest things to do, right? To try to predict the future, or at least predict what is the realm of the possible. In analyzing the future, like help us out a little bit, just help us, like give us some kind of crutch, some kind of tools that we can utilize. So, and that's one question. My second question is that a couple of you mentioned the economic issues as kind of being very much sort of involved here. So would you like briefly characterize for us just what are economic conditions in Russia, but also in Ukraine? I mean, I've been trying to follow some sort of resources of very much varying reliability, to put it mildly. And some people say Ukrainian economy is in a horrible mess, but then the others are saying like, well, yeah, I mean, its export was doing well, and there's a pretty steady stream of cash coming in from various sources, and it's actually Ukraine is doing reasonably okay financially. So, like, how would you guys, like, what is your feeling, both like on the ground, but also from this kind of bigger, large scale perspective? Finally, an even more abstract question, and again, feel free to ignore any of this if there's something more interesting you want to tell us about. But the final question is like, how do we, what is this kind of like overall perspective that we should adopt on sort of ongoing developments in that region? And what I mean by that is, so is the sort of the source of conflict, the source of power, sort of the source of kind of historic change? Is it sort of more traditional, focus on territory, focus on population, on borders, on military power? Do you feel that it's like kind of paradoxically speaking, these old-fashioned ways of doing things are still very much, despite what some people may tell us, is it's still very much the way things are in that part of the world, at least, Or are you finding that no, now it's all about perceptions, it's all about mentalities, it's all about these very kind of diverse, diffuse networks of power, influence, and information, that like we're living in a new age, basically? Are you finding that's to be the case? So I'm going to, this is kind of just some ideas that I've had while listening to your presentations. And as we can see in the Q&A function, there are sort of already a couple of really interesting questions, and Angelina very kindly sort of put in her responses. And then the second question is about sort of why, what are the reasons behind the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2014? And I guess like sort of my follow-up question to that would be, I mean, which is something I've been, kind of fascinated with, well, in this kind of scared kid kind of way, like why didn't Russia do more in 2014 and especially 2015? That's what kind of everybody has been asking. It seems like from the military perspective, Ukraine was there for the taking, or at least sort of a big chunk of it was. And so like, what is it? I mean, we know that there were, I don't know, like a couple of thousand Russian troops that actually took part in the war. Well, why wasn't there a massive invasion and just like a full-scale thing? Because it looked for a while like that's what was going to happen, right? All the infrastructure was laid down for that. Why didn't that happen, and how that can help us analyze today's crisis? So thank you again, everybody, and let's start. Let's get a discussion going. And I see there are a couple of other questions.
Sorry, can you hear me? Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Yes, if I may, I would gladly start from the last question about why Russia didn't sort of invade in 2014. Well, it did. In the same way Russia did in Donetsk and Lugansk region, it tried to do in Odessa and Kharkiv, and it failed for the mere reason that people didn't support it, and the local elites, political, also chose to stay with Ukraine. We saw really huge attempts to lay out the same scenario as Russia did in Donetsk and Lugansk with Kharkiv People's Republic and with Odessa People's Republic, and also in Kryvyi Rog People's Republic and other cities, Kherson and Zaporozhye. Well, it didn't work because Russia and Putin is misinterpreting what Ukraine is about, actually, to some extent, because it did work in some of the places, in some it didn't work. I also gave this quite simple, probably, or simplistic answer to the question about the reasons why Putin invaded in 2014, and the reason that in 2014 it became quite obvious that the desire of Ukrainian people to proceed with European and Euro-Atlantic integration, which is also written in Ukrainian constitution, is quite clear and quite public and quite obvious. In his worldview, there was no other things to do. But no other thing to do. But I also really was interested with the question of Christian meta, with the implementation of the Minsk Accords resolve in current crisis, and why has this not been raised so far? It's a very interesting question, and it's also well, probably one of the most painful discussions here in Ukraine. What do we lose if we take Donbass back as it is? What do we lose if we get another, 15, 20, 25 MPs, pro-Russian MPs in the parliament? What damage to Ukrainian democracy this will bring? What damage to Ukrainian public and internal life this will bring, if we believe that Ukrainian democracy is still strong to, live with it at its side. Why we cannot do it? It's a good question. I think one of the main reasons is a huge politicization of this question. It's not that the civil society is talking about. It's mostly politicians who are having the lead in this discussion. On one hand, on the other hand, there are certain steps that obviously a society which has been and is still at war with over 14,000 people killed, with millions of people who were displaced, with lots of victims, with lots of questions, that needs to take many steps in order to proceed with this. I'm talking about lots of things which will be included in the concept of transitional justice. It means, amnesty. It means finding truth and finding investigating all of the cases that took place. So giving people some sense of fairness as well. Probably it is not taking place because it is not still a right time to do. But I have to say that the current government came to power in order to bring this peace. The general desire of Zelensky's voters, apart from the fact that they wanted to see someone in the government who is not a systematic politician, yes, someone out of the old elites, is also that this politician will bring peace. And Zelensky's job through this years in power was to make Normandy and Minsk work in any way. Many things were done by this team in order to sit down and talk. They changed members of trilateral group, they changed negotiators, they changed approaches, they tried many things. But at the end, Russia also proves, not to be negotiable. So it's a really good question, also an internal question for Ukrainians. Why are we afraid so much? What exactly are we afraid if we take Donbass back? Whether we are capable to digest, so to say, everything that will come with Donbass back. Of course, a principal question that it's a question of first, getting all the Russian troops out of Ukraine and then having democratic elections, which is against Minsk, because Minsk stipulates first elections and then drawing back the troops. This is why Ukraine is trying to overplay it, rewrite it. Yes, first you need to get all the troops out and then you do the democratic elections, which is quite obvious, but it's the opposite to what Minsk stipulates. But at the same time, it's a good question again. What are we afraid so much of?
I think we should just let you guys take turn and respond. Feel free to respond to any of the questions that I asked or participants asked, and any question, even though somebody else has addressed them already. Just feel free to just do whatever you want. So who wants to go next?
Yeah, may I? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to answer the question about the cyber attacks, where it's like is it like a possible front of the conflict, and is it like it can escalate? So I'm definitely not like a specialist on the cyber warfare. However, I was following that topic for like a few years ago when the NotPetya, which was like a ransomware, it's to some extent hit Ukraine, and that actually was super damaging the Ukrainian economics. And so I would just explain shortly, well, like as far as I know. So definitely it was one of the things which everyone was predicting, that the part of this current escalation of the conflict will be not like a mass invasion, but it will be like probably more like a more escalation on Donbass itself, plus cyber warfare to some extent, plus of course economic pressure, because like NotPetya left traces which still are not so well researched, and we don't know how many like actually computers are hacked, how many of them can be used in the like a potential cyber attack, because the recent one, it was DDoS, so it wasn't like a super harmful, it just basically make the server down, and just because it can increase so much traffic, and it just make like a short interruption of the working of the state, a lot of state institutions, a lot in the banking system. However, it wasn't so damaging, but we can definitely expect that that will increase, and that will be used as one of the options. Ukraine actually, it's really experienced country by the cyber attacks. There was like attempt to interrupt one of the power stations, and yeah, we definitely see a lot of that in the next months, probably, and years.
Yeah, thanks a lot. These are all really great comments on Minsk 2. That's part of the Russian foreign policy, is to insist on implementing Minsk 2 as they define it. There are many terms in there that are disputed and are part of the negotiations. And again, this is a document that's not very favorable to Ukraine. And it's hard to imagine analogies where one neighboring country insists on changing the domestic political arrangements of a neighboring country in this way. There are obviously examples, but this is a very unusual setup. But we need to recognize that that's just one part of the picture. I mean, Russia's demands around this crisis are been made very clear from the beginning. Ukraine there should be written guarantees that Ukraine will never join NATO, and President Putin himself has expressed skepticism about the value of even written guarantees, that NATO should pull back to its troops and materiel to positions prior to 1997. And what Russia is really demanding here is a fundamental restructuring of the European security architecture that's been built after the end of the Cold War, and to rewrite the post-Cold War settlement. So Minsk plays some role in that, but of course Russia's demands have been much more expansive. Again, these are bargaining positions, and we shouldn't take them as the final word, in that Russia may be willing to accept less. However, it does suggest that Russia's play on Ukraine is much bigger than just implementation of the Minsk II Accords. I want to get back to Sergei's question about how we should study and how we should view events taking place here. And I spend a lot of time studying public opinion data and doing surveys in Russia and Ukraine. And these are really helpful in lots of ways. It gets us beyond, some of the, generalizations based on, interviews with a narrow group of people who might not resemble the broader public. You can, get diverse opinions from broad sectors of the population, all the usual benefits of doing survey research. At the same time, we really have to, and I should say, Russia is a really interesting case because it's an autocracy, but it's also a place that on most questions, you can do pretty high quality research. So relative to other autocracies, Russia is a pretty good place to study public opinion. At the same time, we need to recognize that public opinion doesn't automatically get translated into policy, that public opinion can change over time. Also, that public opinion is good at measuring reported responses, but often people will say they'll do one thing, but when push comes to shove and they have to do that in reality, they may not. For example, answers about the percentage of the population that's willing to take up arms, that might be higher in reality in the surveys than it is in reality. And it also might reflect, events on the ground where people may be willing to take up arms and never even given it much thought before, just because of, immediate events. The other point I want to make is that, looking forward, the military people say, no battle plan survives its first contact with the enemy. And Mike Tyson, the boxer, has this great quote where he says, "Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face." In the sense that, once a crisis like this unfolds, we should expect the unexpected, and keep our eyes really wide open to the possibility of events that are just outside of our imagination right now. Remember the U.S. Intervention in Iraq in 2003. The administration pitched a shock and awe, and one big attack by the West would be so powerful that the Iraqis would just throw down their arms and welcome the U.S. troops as their saviors from the oppressor. I'm caricaturing a little bit, but this was an important narrative, and of course it didn't turn out that way. And I want to also second Angelina's point about Kremlin misreading Ukraine and Ukrainian public opinion, and expecting that there would be a lot more support for Novorossiya project in 2014 and 2015. And I think even today, I think the Kremlin continues to think that there's some portion of Ukrainian society that will be sympathetic. But I think that overlooks that, over the last 8 years, and even going back further, Ukraine has just evolved so far culturally, economically, and even militarily from its past relationship with Moscow. Ukraine's largest trading partners are China and the EU, not Russia. And it's true that Russia and Ukraine have long historical ties, but Ukraine also has long historical ties with Central and Eastern Europe as well. So, I think there may be one of the reasons why this attempt to kind of bring Ukraine back into the fold is happening now is perhaps a recognition in the Kremlin that if nothing is done, it will be that much more difficult to bring Ukraine back under heel in the future than it is today.
May I also pick up after?
Absolutely, your turn,
Professor Frye, because
go ahead.
Expect and unexpected. This is actually a very good point to explain what's happened in 2014, 15, and also with both Minsk agreements, because both Minsk agreements being as bad as it gets for Ukraine, because both of them, for the context, were signed after wrecking losses of Ukrainian army, first in Ilovaisk and then in Debaltseve. The public opinion for Russian side is not there, and this is one of the arguments flowing around. It's how actually this invasion will fly if there is if there will be no public support. It will be endless guerrilla, which will end up anywhere. It's basically a Balkan war. At the same time, I want to go back to Professor Antonov's question about how we should read this, and where is it new one, or is it just old power plays a mid-19th century geopolitical fun? I actually believe that's there are a couple of voices outside and a few articles published in earlier this week and last week that's it's all new Brezhnev doctrine. It's basically Brezhnev doctrine 2.0. It's looking on enlargement by this very trickling policies on the borders of the Soviet Union, and the hyping the trope of the besieged castle. At the same time, all of those operations, which also like taken from 2014 and basically to now, well, I'm a historian of early Soviet Union, so for the person with the hammer, everything looks like a nail. For me, it all looks like late 20s and basically Soviet provocations on Chinese border, when the whole when the proxy wars were launched by Stalin's government to take a piece of China. Which is also was important for the Chinese railroad, but we are not talking about that. Actually, the whole thing, the whole trope, even about NATO, because I see people asking about, like, I see Nelly Petlik. Yeah, she's. I hope I pronounced this right. Like the whole questions about NATO, the trope of NATO is discussed primarily because the Kremlin is discussing this. This indicates that the issue has been formed by Kremlin, and NATO's ability to resolve the problem will appear I don't know, self-evident within that framework. Accepting the first framing offered is alluring, as it eliminates the need to consider others. So the strategic thinkers will typically view this like as a framing everything to the Russian-NATO relationship. While there is no real talk about NATO in Ukraine. Well, it's all about planning for the future, but there it's basically like I understand why such people as Dmitry Trenin saying about the Brezhnev doctrine and like speculating about Armenia and all the missiles thing, but there is no missiles in Ukraine. There is like actually. There's actually more tendency to get used to the situation in as it is, and yeah, actually, I honestly and very simply walk out of Minsk agreements as smoothly as possible, because if you look at the latest Poroshenko administration's treatment of Minsk agreement, every meeting on the Minsk agreements, and it was ended up with a walking out of Ukrainian side and saying this is not what we are ready to do. This is all bollocks, and we will. This is all just bad for Ukraine, and just as was planned to do, because Minsk II was a ceasefire for the better time to make a better agreement. The question is, can Ukraine actually get a better agreement? Can it lobby somehow? Probably this is a more question to Professor Frye and political scientists, because historians will deal with it in a couple decades. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I mean, I propose that we have another round of responses. There have been a few interesting questions there, including sort of a couple of questions looking at the sort of role of President Zelensky's government, and maybe you guys can address just like what is current perception of Ukrainian political system among sort of regular people on the street, like is there confidence, or is there perception of political struggle, or there's a political unity, something like that. But also please feel free to address any of the other questions. So maybe we should have another round, right? Go back to Angelina perhaps.
Yes, sure. I'll probably go with the question about the public perception of Zelensky's activity, political activity, and just the political reality. So we can see from the polls, I'm not giving you any wrong numbers. I could be mistaking, but just the general picture is that Zelensky is still the most popular politician in Ukraine, even though his party goes down with each political scandal. There were several huge political scandals connected to corruption, connected to other just embarrassing behavior of the members of this party, which went down. And now, if I'm not mistaken, I didn't check the latest poll, it's number 2 after the Poroshenko's party. So it's not even number 1 anymore. Several members were excluded from the party. Probably it's not the end of the story, because we can see that many members of this party were really some random people who joined this huge brand of Zelensky, very much popular among Ukrainians himself. As to Zelensky, as a political leader, of course, his personal political rating goes down with each political season, which is quite normal for politicians who come with over 70% of support. So he's right now something slightly over 23, 24, I guess. And some older, political icons are going up, which I feel is quite normal traditionally for Ukraine. But we can feel that political struggle and the future campaign, parliamentary campaign, which starts next year, is very, very close. Many of the politicians who joined Zelensky's team and then later on were excluded or left, for example, the Speaker of the Parliament, are now forming sort of alliances with former ministers, and maybe prime minister, former prime minister as well. Everyone is looking closely at what the mayor of Kyiv doing, Vitaly Klitschko, who became suddenly one of the most popular and loved by the foreign media, speakers, who is now speaking not for Kyiv only, but for the whole country. He is giving interviews to foreign press, explaining how Ukrainians, are getting ready to resist, what is the level of solidarity among Ukrainians, and things which are not, of course, they're not obvious for a mayor of the city to do, even if the city is the capital. So political struggle and political life in Ukraine is always very vivid, but we feel that we are sort of over the equator of Zelensky's time in office, and something really, really interesting is coming up with the next political season, with the parliamentary campaign coming. And we can see that many politicians who find themselves out of the boat for the past 2 years will be back in politics, even though there is quite a strong quite a strong interest and sympathy among Ukrainians to have another person out of the system, to have another sort of Zelensky in the office or in politics. But very much, of course, it depends very much, of course, of how we get out of this situation. How will this whole story with the Russian buildup at Ukrainian border will end or will proceed? I think every politician in this situation understands that for many of them it's sort of a prime time, so they are using it extensively. But that's sort of how politics work, probably everywhere.
I will just follow up, please.
Yeah, let's go in the same order as before.
Sure. No, I just want to say that because I was doing rather vox pop for the last days, and I talked with I would say, a lot of people since last month, and I never heard actually from anyone. I think there was no data research on that exactly, so it's only impression, and we still need real research on that. But I never heard that anyone in Ukraine told me that actually Ukrainian politicians are all downplaying the threat or they are causing the panic. I rather heard that all Western media, or in general, or Ukrainian media, sometimes causing the panic, and Western politicians. So that was mostly the if someone was telling what's happening, so and they were blaming someone, they were rather not blaming like a local political elite, which is quite something new for me, because usually when I'm talking with the people about the politics, they're complaining quite a lot. In that sense, I haven't that feeling. Maybe you had like a different experience with that, but because again, it's not like a sociological research, but that was really interesting that people don't feel that actually the politicians at the moment are trying to make like a make advantage of the situation. I would rather say that that's the moment when they understand the threats and the possibilities of the conflict. Maybe Angelina or Yevhenii would like to comment that or something, because that's again what I'm seeing on it.
It depends what politicians, of course. I mean, there are politicians who are in power and whose direct responsibility is to deal with the threat, yes, to organize infrastructure and to do their job. But also some politicians who suddenly became experts #1 on this topic, using just politically using this time. Yeah, but it's quite obvious, yes.
Yeah, just briefly, 2 points about Zelensky and Biden's relationship, which is interesting. On the one hand, I think the Biden administration has been good about keeping in close contact with the government in Kyiv, because they're worried about a charge of making a deal with Russia against the wishes of Ukraine. So the slogan of nothing done to Ukraine without Ukraine. At the same time, I think that there's been reporting here that the Biden administration has been frustrated by Zelensky's stay calm approach. And often the messages from Kyiv and from Washington have been really at cross purposes to each other. And maybe that's just a normal function of domestic politics in both countries. But it is an interesting phenomena. And it might even be good for Zelensky to show that he is not just an extension of the government in Washington. So this independent position that he's taking may be the best one for Ukraine, but it also might be one that's politically advantageous for him.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would like to pick up on some points which are first mentioned in the questions, because like I'm not in a position to comment the international relations or political expertise, and more again on the social side. And there's actually one. Well, there was a provocative question on the question Q&A about civil war, and it's not a civil war. This is a very important thing. Even international humanitarian law say it's not a civil war. Like by the whole evidence we gather, and there are organizations which are gathering evidence on the war crimes or crimes against humanity executed by Russian soldiers. And like I'm the living person, survived the Russian captivity. Hello, and like I actually talked with the Russian soldiers while being on the basement. So and there was like a whole interesting interaction. But another question, which is also very interesting, and like this is my favorite question since November 2019. What about people on occupied territories think? We don't know, and nobody is in position to know in details. And all polling you see from the occupied territories are made up and unclear by the statistical reasons. We don't know how many people actually live there. We don't know the segregation, the gender age segregation. We don't know anything. And the polling and those organizations which are claiming that they are do polling on occupied territories, either, well, there are a couple of organizations which are doing that, and they do this, they do close research, and they do this mostly for humanitarian organizations. But most published research you see from occupied territories, it's basically manipulation, political manipulation. Like in Ukraine, the Ukrainian Institute for the Future is basically doing manipulative research. Is that in 2019, there is no way somebody can, for instance, overcome the spiral of silence in occupied territories. This is still a very dangerous place to live, which with with no rights guarantees. So unfortunately, no, we don't know what people there think. We would like to know. As a researcher, I would like to see the data, but unfortunately, there is no clear data, and the news coming out there, like with evacuation right now, the latest news saying like they're evacuating orphanages. So basically, there are no people, lines of people ready to evacuate. They're evacuating those who have no say in evacuation, while regular people have building up in lines for gas stations and ATMs. This is the reality of the occupied territory.
Thank you, everybody. So we still have a few minutes, maybe for like a couple of quick comments. I myself would just love to hear a couple of comments on the economic conditions, because I think it's really kind of important in terms of our theme today, you know, social implications and daily life and so on. Whoever wants to take that one. Go ahead. Dr. Frye?
Yeah, just quickly, the sanctions that the US has put on Russia are not seen by the Russian public as particularly punitive. Most Russians say that they haven't really noticed them. And in some research I did, despite attempts by the Russian government to blame sanctions for the slow growth that's happened in Russia over the last 8 years, Russians blame the Russian government for the slow economic growth and not the sanctions. But keep in mind that these sanctions are targeted sanctions that are really supposed to focus on the elites and on specific companies, and are not targeted at the mass public. If there is the imposition of mass sanctions on the financial sector or on the import of various kinds of technology, so iPhones, iPads, and other essential devices, right, that one cannot live without, it could have a very different impact on the Russian public.
Thank you. And how about Angelina and Paweł, since you guys are in Kiev?
Yeah,
maybe you can.
I just wanted to say that because that's with this economic question, everyone is a bit hesitant because there is still not so many data. We can just expect what will happen, because usually if there is like an economic impact, it's not happening immediately. It's not hitting the economy immediately. So like at the moment, what Angelina mentioned, hryvnia lost a bit of value, but it wasn't so terrible as people expected. Partially because of the support from the credits and the stabilization funds from the Western countries, so European Union and Western countries. So we will see actually, because there is like a lot, we don't know how many actually investors, like businessmen, like a huge part, which are the huge companies, what are they doing, what are their actions? Because I heard a lot of rumors that some of the companies actually were thinking to like evacuate the personnel, but it's too early to say something, because people are considering that. So of course, if you look from the psychological point of view, definitely if you live under the pressure, your activity, it's a bit weaker. I feel super tired all the time, because we are like, you need to work a lot, you think a lot, and following the news and everything. So it just basically, that's causing an impact, but it's like a small and without time and like a huge research at the moment. We can just suppose what would happen. Plus, I'm not an economist, so I actually want to research that, like a cyber warfare and economics in the next months. That two topics which I want to follow up. But we will definitely see the impact, and we can tell more after the time, because it's usual like that. Even I remember I was working on the Nagorno-Karabakh war, and I was trying to do, after a couple of months, doing the story about how the economics, how was the impacts of the economics, and there was at the moment, no one can tell anything about that. So we just need to wait for that.
Thank you, Paweł. How about a couple of words from Angelina, and then a couple of words from Yevhenii, because we're almost out, we are kind of out of time, but let's just quickly wrap it up. Angelina, what do you think?
Yeah, I
since
had
you're
the
also there?
same point that we will need some time to see, and we need to understand that while we were arranging this roundtable, the dynamics were, this way. In a week, it was different, and even now, as we talk, the dynamics is really, really different. All our eyes are now at Donbass. We see that the shelling this night was really extensive. We got messages about the shellings of the checkpoints. We now receive messages of the civilians, as Yevhenii said, being evacuated from the self-proclaimed republics. So, frankly speaking, I don't know what we will wake up to tomorrow morning. I still feel that it is more possible that something would rather happen in Donbass and around Donbass. That means Donetsk and Lugansk Oblast, the parts that are under the control of Ukrainian government, and we will have to see. And of course, it will have the direct consequences for Ukrainian economy.
Mm-hmm.
And as I was saying, that there is no panic. There are no lines at the ATMs and the currency exchange boxes. I cannot guarantee that the picture will be different tomorrow. We still, the situation is very, very much dynamic. Also,
Mm-hmm.
it is important to keep in mind, cybersecurity. Ukrainian state bank, Privatbank, that has probably the most users, was attacked last week, and the services that were available to millions of Ukrainians online were blocked for several hours. So it was quite problematic to get the money from ATM machines and to do any sort of money transfer in the network. So it's, even though our vice prime minister, who's responsible for digital transformation, whom we recently spoke to, he said that the majority of Ukrainian state networks are quite secure. Well, nobody can guarantee that the banking system, which is quite vulnerable and which is electronic, which people are using, on their smartphones, will be hit spontaneously any time in the coming days.
Okay, thank you, Angelina. So wonderful, well, not wonderful, but informative. So how about Yevhenii? Just a couple of words to sum us up, and then our time is up.
It's very hard to sum up, actually, because as Angelina mentioned, everything unraveled so fast. That's this attack actually happens 3 days ago, and we think it was last week because it's happened so. The events are so jam-packed now, as probably our schedules are jam-packed with all of this roundtables and talks. For me, it's hard to say anything else. Then it's just important to remember that all these events of the present are part of the larger history. And by larger history, I mean not just the development of the last 8 years, but actually development of about the last 100 years. Again, as a person who more do history, I see these contingencies, and I think it's important to remember even on the ongoing analysis on the field. So yeah, and thank you, Max, for mentioning the Putin Versteiners in the media, which is also a very interesting case, I think.
Okay, well, I think we are out of time, right? So I would like to thank our panelists again. This was very informative, I thought. Learned a lot, and it was a real pleasure meeting all of you. Well, other than those already knew. Again, this was a panel on the current crisis in Ukraine and Russia. This has been hosted by Yale's program in Russian, East European, and Eurasian Studies. So again, thanks to all the participants, and let's keep our fingers crossed, right? But at least being informed goes a long way towards handling and processing, analyzing those kind of events. So again, thank you everyone, and thank you for Professor Molly Bronson for suggesting it originally, and to Yevhenii for organizing it.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was a
Stay
pleasure.
safe, everyone.
Take care.
Thank you very
Take care.
much. Thank you.
Bye.